Thank you very much, and certainly thank you for the very kind introduction for all three of us. Kind of thing that, and certainly I expect that this will be both an interesting and exciting opportunity for all of us to hear particularly what my two comrades here have to say as current elected officials. I'm well aware that things change. I've been out of politics for a while. So it'll be really interesting for me to hear what they have to say as well. So, and with that, we're going to begin by giving each of them an opportunity for the 5 or 10 minutes to talk a little bit about what they wish to say about the topic and perhaps a little bit more about their background. And then we'll move into more of a conversation about some of the kinds of things that might be of significant interest to all of you as well as to myself. And some opportunity for questions at the end, much as you had this morning. We also know that we run right up until lunch. So when we smell it all coming through here, we'll know it's time to say no more, we're done, kind of thing in that. And so we look forward to both an interesting and exciting session. So to start, Hillary, if you would like to begin.
Thank you. The mic's good. Oh, look at that. Thank you so much, Michael. It's a real privilege to be here, and I'm feeling both a little intimidated and also excited to be the only person who everybody here in the room doesn't know, or doesn't know. And I was also saying to Michael earlier, that reading his bio and learning a little bit about his work, it made me want to switch positions with him so we could hear more from him. But I think we'll have that chance over lunchtime. So thanks so much to Public Interest Alberta for having me here and for all of you for being here this morning with us. So I just want to talk a little bit about how I became involved, not only as a city councillor, but in my advocacy work ahead of that. So in my bio, it was mentioned that I work for an organization called Upstream, and I won't be there for too much longer. I hope to be able to dedicate, well, I'm already dedicating full-time hours to my work on council, but not have another job in addition to that soon, but I love the organization, and a lot of what I know about how to do this work comes from my work there. So I just want to tell you a little bit about Upstream. It's a nonprofit based in Saskatoon. We've existed for just 3 years, and we look at policy from the perspective of health, but rather than focusing on healthcare, we focus on what comes before healthcare. Why is it that people either are able to develop and be healthy or not? And what are the barriers that lots of people have in place to having a healthy life? And those things start with poverty. It starts with whether you have enough money in your pocket to be able to make healthy decisions, to be able to prioritize things that are healthy for you and your family, and to be able to have, the spare time to do some of the things that we think of more directly as related to health, things like exercise and healthy eating. So that's what we do. We talk a lot about housing, we talk a lot about access to healthcare, the work that the previous panelists work in, and we also talk about things that more directly relate to my work on council, things like the built environment, things like environmental sustainability, and things like, of course, housing, as I mentioned. So that's a bit of where I come from. I am a grad of the Next Step program. I was in the 4th cohort in Saskatoon, and I learned a tremendous amount from that program. If you have any young people in your life, I think the age limit is 32-ish. It doesn't tend to be very strict. Please encourage them to consider applying for the Next Step program. It's a truly amazing way to meet people. It's a truly amazing way to learn more about your place in this world and in this society and what it means to be an active citizen, either within or outside of our structures where decisions typically get made. So please encourage that and do support the program if you have a chance. The Labour movement has been an incredible supporter of the Next Step program across this country. It's a program that started in BC and has been expanding east since, and I want to thank everybody who currently supports the program as well. So one of the other entrances I had into this work was through some work with a group called Saskatoon Cycles. And we're the advocacy, not we, I'm not on it anymore. They are the advocacy organization around cycling in Saskatoon. And for a time, I started as I think, the communications coordinator, and then ended up co-chairing the organization with a phenomenal woman named Kathy Watts, who's a retired physiotherapist. I think she's going on 70. And we had an amazing experience learning from one another in kind of this intergenerational setting about what it means to make change in our communities. And ultimately, we ended up bringing forward a campaign called Better Bike Lanes. We had never had a separated bike lane in Saskatoon. We wanted one. We knew that the hardest thing to do would be to get one downtown. That's the most hotly contested area for space. And so we asked for some separated bike lanes downtown, and we got them. And it was a really phenomenal effort, and something that kind of helped me to feel extra encouraged to do more of this, but also really disappointed by some of the experience I'd had there, specifically with city administration, where we were consulted and we were heavily involved in some of the planning, specific planning around these lanes, and then where our feedback at a certain point was simply no longer heard. And so that really encouraged me to think more about what my role would be going forward. And ultimately, I ran for city council this past election and was elected at the end of October of last year. So yeah, I really love my job on council. And one of my favorite parts is helping people in the community navigate their way through City Hall. It can be a really intimidating experience to speak in front of a committee or in front of council for the first time. And it can be just as intimidating to figure out how to do that, where to do that, when to do that. And there's processes and there's procedures, and you won't be hurt if you don't follow them. And so I think the biggest tip that I have is to simply speak with somebody who might be sympathetic. It's the first step. And I spend a lot of time speaking with groups and individuals who want to see some change and don't know where to start, or think they know where to start and want to check, or want to know where the level of support might be on council. In fact, on my way down here last night, I spent about 20 minutes on the phone with a representative of a group that's going to be in front of committee on Monday, and are part of the campaign that I'll be talking about a little bit later. So that's really my first tip, is just talk to somebody who's there. It's their job. Starting with your ward councillor is often a good place to go, but if you are pretty sure that they're going to be unsympathetic to the issue you want to discuss, feel free to start elsewhere. It's councillor's job to help you navigate that system and help you to figure out how to be successful in your endeavors. So that's really the first tip. I have lots of other tips, but I think we're going to be getting to that a little bit later, and I'm going to let Michael introduce himself. So.
Good, Ed. Thank you very much. And so now we'll turn to Michael Jans.
All right, wonderful. So first of all, I think we all at lunch have to give Hillary a big high five, because she's here today in the face of a absolutely horrible provincial budget from Brad Wall, cutting the funding for libraries. And I, like Hillary, have been on the board of the public library in our city, and to think that the library, the cornerstone of your community, that such an important institution for so many as a source of social mobility and access and literacy, community and education and everything else, and to think that libraries are now being jeopardized in another community here in Canada is just horrendous. So I think we need to support Hillary however we can in protecting Canada. So I too misread the bio. I thought Hillary and I were interviewing Michael Fair. So I got set up here. But because of this egregious typo, I guess if I had to share with you a few things, they would be this. My goal on my panel is not to tell you how to lobby, because you're here, you're at Public Interest Alberta, you know this is in your essence, you're taking time out of your week to come and participate in public interest, so you know this. What I'm here to help you is hopefully give you some ammunition to take back to your club, your union, your organization, your movement, and to maybe give you a third party to just say, well, I heard this, maybe we should consider this. So hoping to just support you in your work and give you a few more tools. I think one of the things that I've learned as a progressive in politics is that sometimes people in the progressive movement, we think that just because we have virtue on our side, or we have the right argument, or we have justice on our side, we sometimes think that that's enough. And we sometimes think, well, why won't the politician just do this? Can't they see that it's right? Can't they see that it's just? And I think sometimes we don't have a as crass or as a raw, cynical approach to power, an approach to evidence and collecting data and facts and the robustness of the argument, because we are so convinced about the justice of our decision and what we need to do. So I'm hoping that through some of these conversations we can think about other ways of approaching that. And though we have the angels on our side, we also want to make sure that we have the right arguments and all of the evidence needed to help support us in that work too. And I'm guided by 3 quotes in the work that I do. And I'll just give them to you, and then you can guess. You can just shout out who gave them. So the long arc of history bends towards justice.
Martin Luther King Jr.
Thank you. Power surrenders nothing without a demand. Never has, never will.
Douglas.
Yeah, as Donald Trump said, that young black man doing work right now somewhere in the United States. And finally, you want to get things done, you need power, you need people or money, preferably both.
Lennon.
Saul Alinsky, but probably Lennon said that too. John Lennon, right? So, my story, that's actually a Larry Bowie joke. Somebody said, I was at a meeting recently and they said, well, I was listening to Larry and he let me know that Lennon said this, and there was a gasp in the audience. And Larry said, John Lennon, John Lennon. And actually, I should say, I said to Larry once, so I was first elected to the school board in 2010. I was Alberta's youngest school trustee. I was 26 years old. Got myself bright-eyed and bushy-tailed into municipal politics and education politics, and very early on I sought out Larry, and we've gone for breakfast almost every month at the high-level diner since I got elected, and that's been my chance to seek his mentorship and his counsel, and others have so generously helped me along the way, from being a cheeky upstart at the U of A to getting to be involved here at Edmonton Public, and helping education advocacy and other groups like yourselves around Alberta. And I said to Larry once, I'm so thankful for your mentorship. And he said, no, sir, not mentorship, we're co-conspirators. Remember that. Don't think you're getting off that easy. So I think that I think speaks to Larry in his sense of humor. And such good work he's doing as chair of Public Interest Alberta. So as I mentioned, I've been involved both as a lobbyist from different positions, such as in student advocacy at the University of Alberta. I was president of the student union there, so we were lobbying the University of Administration, City Council, provincial and federal governments. I've been lobbying in Ottawa and Capitol Hill, in Parliament Hill, and also down here at the legislature, or here at City Hall. I've also had the privilege of lobbying through other organizations. I worked for the Edmonton Federation of Community League, so lobbying on a neighborhood level to city councillors, or in the library community with the Alberta Library Trustees Association, and lobbying councillors like Michael Fair to help us deal with squirrels or whatever the local menace was that week. And then finally on the school board, I've been in a position where I have been lobbied by many parents, community groups, different organizations, to pesticide companies, tobacco activists, the whole gamut of labor, public sector, civil and corporate organizations. So I hope that I can lend you some of my wisdom from just the experience.
Thanks to both of you. Just a couple of notes that I might say quickly. It's interesting that this session is all from those of us who have dealt primarily at a local level, and that we've all been involved with local politics, whether it was school board or whatever. Mostly it isn't that we haven't lobbied in other governments, but that our experience in our work is at that kind of place, which I think is a huge place, or a significant place to be spending a lot of time, and where you build up some of the kind of capital that you can move forward and do things. I also note that although you talked about angels, we should mention that both your name and my name is the biggest angel around, who slayed the devil. And historical terms, supposedly the myth, isn't that? So that perhaps stands us in good stead. And Michael didn't mention that while he was bushy-tailed and bright-eyed at the school board, he was also had undertaken a master's degree at the U of A, which he has successfully completed as well during that time, among other things. Plus got married and has a kid. So congratulations to you on that. And I can't resist it was mentioned that I'm involved with a group called Paths for People. Bicycles is our big issue. I've been spending time with them, that on the board. We have a meeting coming up. We've been pushing for a grid downtown, which is going to happen this year and soon. And so very much along that. And you were mentioning a group you were dealing with that are going to be presenting on Monday. I'm at City Council on Monday on a different issue and presenting to the committee, back in my old role of encouraging politicians to make decisions that I think are good decisions. So you have an interesting group in front of you, and I'm going to start the conversation by asking them to talk a little bit about either a goal or a program or a direction that you championed that came from what you heard from constituents. What is it you heard? What were people saying to you or a group that led you to work on some direction at the city or the school board to try to make a difference? And who wants to start? Good.
Thank you, Michael. I've only been on council for 5 months, so unfortunately I haven't had the chance to bring a whole lot of new issues forward. We're just getting ourselves figured out in terms of what we're going to do for the next 4 years. But there are lots of things that I've gotten to be involved in that did come from the community. And actually there's something that we'll be hearing at the Planning and Development Committee on Monday that is quite familiar to you folks here in Edmonton, or I would think it would be, and that is the issue of backyard hens. Who here has backyard hens?
Chickens.
Chickens. Does anybody here have backyard chickens?
Who wants backyard chickens?
Who here would like to have backyard chickens? Cool. Yeah, and who here has heard of River City Chickens Collective? You? So that's your local chicken advocacy group. They exist, and they're quite successful. In fact, you have a pilot project took place. It was evaluated. I'm not exactly sure what came of that next step, but my guess is that it's being worked into some kind of permanent approval. So presently, we are very creative in Saskatoon. We have the Bridge City chickens. It's very, very inventive. You always need a catchy name, and you're the River City, we're the Bridge City, we've got it covered. So the Bridge City Chickens are a group of folks who are coming to council on Monday to ask us to do exactly what you guys did, which is to put together a pilot project for backyard hens. They'd like to see 30 yards, somewhere between 3 and 5 hens per yard. They've got a very extensive set of guidelines. They're going to do an education program, they're going to do monitoring, they've got the SPCA involved, they've got a bunch of community associations signed on. All of the pilot yards would be in those communities. They have really covered their bases. And you might be very, very impressed by this, as you should be. But the reason that they're so organized is because this issue has come to our council and failed miserably multiple times. It was very ugly. And that is not a way to start. I do not recommend coming to council to see your issue fail. And it's not to say that every issue can succeed just because you want it to. But the thing with an issue like this is we can feel like we have the angels on our side. It just makes sense. Shouldn't everybody want us to have better food production in our city, food security, all of those things? A few hens isn't a big deal. We'll come and ask council for it. Well, you have to expect opposition. And that is, I think, where a lot of groups fall short, is they get their arguments in place, but they forget what the other side is going to be arguing. And often that opposition does not show its face until the meeting that you're presenting something at. And all of a sudden, there's these people who you've never seen before, who are way more organized than you think they could possibly be, because they probably just heard about this 4 days ago, and they have some serious arguments that you didn't think about. And so that's kind of some of the lessons that I've been learning with this Bridge City Chickens project, is we've now had a few shots at this, and they haven't gone well. And so now, this is ironclad. Like, every possible argument against these chickens has been shored up. That isn't to say that I feel confident it's even going to pass committee on Monday, but it's something to keep in mind, because the impact of somebody taking something in front of a decision-making body and not doing it very robustly that impact has long-lasting implications. Not only is the decision likely to not go your way, but in our council, and I'm not sure if this is the same in Edmonton, if a council has voted on a decision with regards to changing a certain bylaw in a certain way, that vote cannot take place again for 12 months. So you can't even bring the issue forward again for a year. Not only that, the issue becomes kind of tainted. It becomes an issue that failed last time, it'll probably fail again, didn't go so hot, the group was kind of disorganized. There's also an element of fatigue that can go along with it. And returning members of council, I'm new, so this will be the first time I've actually debated this issue. There are returning members of council who have debated this going on 3 times, and they're kind of sick of it. And they want to be able to just make a decision, and they feel like they've made it many times before, and now they're going to be asked to make it again. So now they're already grumpy with you by the time you've come forward with your issue. So those are just a few comments to get you thinking a little bit about how to be as proactive as possible in bringing something forward, not being afraid to do so, but working really actively with a champion on council so that you can get a good sense of what's going to be a sufficient amount of work to do before you put something to a decision, because the implications of having the decision go the way that you, opposite to the way that you wanted them to, are big and can last a long time. So that's one issue that I'm working on that I'm excited to do a little preparing for on my way home on Sunday. But I think is the work that they're doing this time around is really admirable, and there have been a lot of lessons learned from the last few goes at it.
Thanks. At local levels, we do really interesting things, don't we?
So I could think about 2 case studies that I'd share about. One, I brought forward to the Board of Trustees. I met with a series of health professionals and activists and dietitians and nutritional advocates who wanted to see a 50 cents per liter tax added to sugar-added beverages. So basically a sugar tax on your Coca-Colas and your Pepsis, etc., imposed throughout Alberta. It would raise $180 million a year. It could go towards prevention programs in schools and initiatives like that. I thought it was excellent. I thought it was great. Brought it forward to my colleagues. Unfortunately, I lost the vote. So there's one where it wasn't successful. But then more timely, just because Jason Kenney is, I don't know what to call him, the potential leader of one of the political parties in Alberta, the leader now, Jason Kenney had suggested that it might be a good idea to out students to their parents, which is a terrible idea. I maybe raised the issue of the Edmonton Public Journey to create a sexual orientation and gender identity policy, the first in Western Canada, in 2012. That was one where we were lobbied by kids, by members of the community, by members of the queer community, by members of the faith community, to create something to help some of our most vulnerable and at-risk kids. We brought forward the policy. We had a very robust public debate. We created the policy 5 years ago. It's been very, very successful and has been adopted throughout many other places in Alberta and other parts of Western Canada. So you win some, you lose some.
Thank you for that. I remember all of those arguments as well, kind of thing. That, and I must say that in just to build on that, in my day, shortly after I was elected, in the first few months, I had a small group that met with me to talk about dogs off leash. I didn't have a clue what they were talking about. And at that time in Edmonton, this was '92, there was no such, there were no such places, kind of thing that. And what I knew about it was zero, kind of thing that. And so I had to respond to the group, and there were a couple of members of it was a small group of 5 or 6, a couple of them I actually knew quite well. I had no idea they even had a dog, much less anything about what it was all about. And one of the things that they did well, in my opinion, is they didn't assume that I knew a whole lot. And part of the meeting with me was to bring me up to speed as to what this was about, what was happening in Calgary and other places, how it could be done in Edmonton. And like you were indicating, they had done work with the city administration in parks. And rather than talking about 80 parks, that they were talking about 12 places in the city that they thought. And they had done that work with the administration as where they thought that might be the most reasonable places to start, kind of thing, and to have it. They were also convinced that if they were successful, that the number of places that could have dogs off leash would grow. because there would be interest in other parts of the city, et cetera, kind of thing. And so they did then a lot of work to lobby others, and I was quite involved with helping to get that on the agenda and get that moving. And there were a series of meetings held, and I lobbied some other members of the council at the time as well, particularly those who had dogs. I soon found out every member who did have a dog as opposed to those who didn't have a dog, kind of thing, that as part of it. And that was ultimately successful. Initially, council sent it back to administration to relook at the places where they were looking at, which was fine, and the administration came back and said, of those 12, 10 of them we could do fairly quickly. Why don't we start there? I think it was 10, it might have been 9. I forget the numbers exactly. And so it passed. And today I think we've got 80 places or more that are now dogs off leash. And any new park of any size is always looked at before it ever is decided it's going to be a park, is whether there'll be a dog off leash area as part of it. It's just part of the process now. So it's interesting to see how things become institutionalized over time as well, and to see that. So anyway, that was one that I was successful at, and I lost more than I was successful at too. So I remember many of those as well. So I'm going to ask each of you if you want to pinpoint a little bit further. You've talked about some of it already, but what kinds of things do you think when a group or individual wants to advocate or lobby for something, what are the things that seem to make a difference to you? What is it that you find helps you in your thinking, or changes your thinking, or is something that you can take forward with other members of council and use that argument? So Mike, I think I'll start with you on this one.
Sure. So ultimately, I'm so cynical in my old age. Part of me wanted to say, well, politicians are motivated by fear and fear alone. Then to quote the V for Vendetta film. Yeah, I think sometimes there's an element in truth of that politicians we have many competing interests, many competing stakeholders, many competing people that are vying for our attention in different issues. And if we know that this is going to be a hot issue, that we're going to be hearing about it on the doorsteps at the next election, that it's going to be continuously in the news cycle, it will continue to hold the top priority place on our desk among the hundreds of other things that we have to deal with. When parents write me a letter, when constituents or community members write me a letter, when I get phone calls at my office, when I see things in the news that a group of parents or Joel has organized something or something's happening, we take notice, we do. Every politician nowadays has either a Google alert where their name comes up in the news, they get a message saying, hey, Joel French mentioned that you're looking at selling EPCOR, this is not good. Read this article. Every politician has some sort of media watch service. It's easier than ever. They go on Twitter. Donald Trump even reads the newspaper and the television and watches the newscast every evening. So getting on the media and getting earned media is still very, very effective. And I think the dirty secret here is it's easier than ever to do. You just need a small group. You go forward. You come out and state your issue. You will get attention. And when you write a letter to the editor, it is noticed. And it brings out, and you would be amazed as an elected official, as somebody who represents, I was board chair for Edmonton Public Schools, 95,000 students, almost 1 million Edmontonians. The number of times I would actually get a call or a letter is very, very small. So that means your impact when you do write a letter is huge. If you do call your city councillor tonight, and what our friend said, and Joel said, if you call them and say, I'm concerned about EPCOR. EPCOR is my ballot issue. Here's why. I live in Inglewood, in your neighborhood. I will put up a lawn sign for your opponent. I will campaign for your opponent. This is my ballot issue. If you do not support it, this is how I will be making my decision, how I will be donating, how I will be volunteering, how I will be telling my friends. You will take notice. And even if they disagree with you, they will have heard you, and this will have weighed into the vote, and they will have heard it. So don't underestimate your power that you have in your own community and in your own city. The numbers of, I think it's very daunting sometimes to think about, oh wow, I gotta present to city council, but you know how few people in a city of 1 million people actually do? You can have a tremendous impact. And don't be discouraged, because that's the one message I'll leave you with. All of these little letters and everything else helps, because you hear it from the other side. On the sugar tax issue, I had 25 dietitians write in to talk about how important it was to do this. We got one letter from the Canadian Taxpayers Association, and I think that scared my colleagues. I think that flipped the vote, where the Canadian taxpayers came out and said, if you're a sugar tax politician, you'll be hearing from us. And whoop, what do you know, I lost the day. So what I should have done differently is solicited more of those letters from parents, from students, from other health advocates, and I think it would have helped. When you want to move something forward, you need much more than a 3-to-1 advantage. I think you need a 10-to-1 advantage. And the more, everyone here in this room today, if you're listening to us, if you go and make those calls, you call city council, you call your school board, you call the board chair of the University of Alberta, Michael, you'll be listened to.
Thank you.
Thanks. I agree with about 98% of what Michael said, but I am going to actually challenge him on one thing, which is that I do not find threats very friendly. I do not take nicely to them. We have been facing some major cuts from our provincial government that were unanticipated. And we've had a lot of really aggressive communications about the potential of us raising taxes in our city. And I'm perfectly fine with people suggesting that we should find other means to fill that deficit. But some of the aggression that's used in some of these messages, I simply don't read them. Once I get to that point, I close them and head on to the next one that has something productive to say. So that's just a note of, I actually think it's really great to make friends. And this doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the person you're working with votes on. It doesn't mean you have to work with them on every issue. It doesn't mean you have to go for breakfast every month. It means you have to build a champion. You have to build a champion for your issue on council, and you may not have one built in. You may have nobody who knows what an off-leash dog park is, and you need to go and educate them. And so that first meeting, being information only, let's get to know one another, is really important. But you also need to make it easy for them to meet with you. You need to let them know that your schedule is flexible. And unfortunately, that actually means that if you want to be an effective advocate, you have to have time on your hands. Which means you need to work with others who have time on their hands, because you may not. That was one of the joys of working on Saskatoon Cycles. I was a busy student and working a part-time job and doing all the other stuff, and Kathy was a retired physiotherapist who loved nothing more than to meet with a city councillor or go to council or do the things in the daytime that I couldn't get to, go to all of those consultation meetings and whatnot. And I think one thing I absolutely agree with is wanting to encourage you to realize the impact of a phone call, of a letter, of an email, of showing up to council, even just sitting in the gallery. So few people do these things, and our present mayor, who was newly elected in October as well, was a city councilor prior to that, and I had worked with him on a couple of issues, and I remember him saying to me, the power of me being able to stand up in chambers and say, I had 7 people call me about this, is tremendous. It's more than you understand. And because there's so many issues we debate that we didn't get any calls about and don't know what people think about. So call, just do it. And it doesn't have to be in fancy language, it doesn't have to be long. It can be, hey, we hear you're debating this. I think it's great, just you got my opinion now. And also that fresh faces are really helpful in this work. Councils and decision-making bodies can get very used to the faces that are there. And especially so with some of the more organized groups, some of your business lobbying groups and other stuff. And so they're really used to knowing what so-and-so, the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, is going to say. But when you show up, they get no clue what you're going to say, and they're very curious to know if you're going to speak for or against this issue, and they're really going to take note. So if you're bringing a coalition of people together, it's great to have a great diversity across your movement, and to try to hit on a number of stakeholders that council and eventually administration is really going to want to hear from. But if you can also make it so that your group is speaking from multiple voices coming from the same direction, that's even better. If from the dog walking community, you've got your dog walkers, and they've now created a name for themselves, and here's the campaign and whatnot, but they've also been working with some environmental folks who think that this is a great opportunity to see some wild prairie in our parks, and they can come separately to council and say, hey, we think this is great too from this other perspective. Now you've got two different groups, even though you've worked together and you've coached them on it, now you've got two groups who are kind of organized and have a bit of a different perspective saying this is a really great thing for our city. So the other thing is just to get a bit familiar with the system. Groups know that their systems are complicated, but still easily get frustrated by people coming to the wrong meeting to try to, argue something or get the process wrong, and just because they are quite willing to help you with it beforehand. So learn the system, but don't hesitate to push the system. What I would suggest is simply to acknowledge when you are. If you're asking a group of people to make a decision that's outside of decisions they would typically make, they think is a little on the edge of their jurisdiction, let them know that you acknowledge that. I'm asking you to do something that's a little out of the ordinary. Now, here's why I think that's extra important, and here's why I think this group of people should make a decision on this, and why you're the right people to be doing it. Don't gloss over the fact that this might feel like not their job, because they might not say this isn't our job. They may just decide not to make a decision on it. So those are a few comments for now.
Good, thank you. Did you have anything further to add? Then I just want to emphasize that, as both of you have done, the importance and the value of providing some input, whether it's by email, letter, phone. In my day, it was only in the last few years I was on council, email existed, it didn't before, kind of thing that. And I think that we have far too long heard from others saying that politicians don't pay attention to what people say, they don't read their letters that they send, they don't respond to phone calls and that. And I think that unfortunately is the cynical view that has been promoted by people that are on the far right. I'll never forget that one of the politicians I worked with all the time I was on council, who was a fellow member of council, would oftentimes say publicly, oh yeah, but I don't really pay attention. That politician knew every phone call that he had. I saw him have a list in front of him of every phone call he had, every letter that he had. And it was a real lesson to me that even some politicians who think they need to say they don't pay attention to that, in fact do. And I've never worked with any politicians that all the time I was on council that in fact that did not pay attention to that, even though they might say something different. And that so that just to emphasize what both members have said here, the politicians do pay attention to those kinds of things, even when they tend to say that they don't. So I think the other thing I really wanted to ask a little bit, because I know our time is running, is that as an elected person, how comfortable or uncomfortable do you feel as the person being lobbied? People asking you, how do you feel? How comfortable or uncomfortable are you in that role? Michael, you want to start there?
Sure, and I think Hillary raises a really good point that you shouldn't, I would recommend that your opening volley is not calling your politician and saying, I'm gonna put up a lot sign for your opponent, I'm gonna end you, I'm gonna, don't obviously jump to that. I think it's very important though that we all have a line. And that line is, this is an issue that is my valid issue, and when it comes to it, it will decide where I'm putting my vote and where I'm gonna mobilize my efforts, and at some point we may have to leave parties or shift campaigns or recruit other candidates who will hold our progressive values if those in power won't. So I think though her point is very good. I think it's much more beneficial to start with your politician sitting down with them and saying, I want to help you be successful. What are some of the things that you want to achieve? I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen in lobbying and in my experience is that people don't start doing their research beforehand on the city councilor, on the politician, on the party, understand their goals, understand their platform, understand their priorities, understand what they are trying to get done, and try and find a way to articulate how your issue actually nests very well with the other issues that they're trying to achieve. I think that when you can come to them and say, I'm here to lobby you, but I want to help you be successful, and here's what I hope to achieve. How can we work together to achieve that and brainstorm together a suite of options along the way? I think that that is often much more constructive, and it lands in a much more robust and longer term solution that's sustainable for everyone. I think often we have to change public opinion, and that's much harder than changing the minds of the politicians. Sometimes you'll have politicians who in their heart of hearts know that something like public funding of private schools is a waste of taxpayers' money, but yet right now they feel constrained that they can't act on it. So let's understand why they feel constrained, and let's see what we can do to remove some of those misconceptions or those fears and to help us move ahead. So I think it's most of us, the biggest beef we would have as I would say I have as an elected official, is that we don't get lobbied enough. We want to hear from you more. We need your support. It's lonely. It's lonely in our offices. Call us, show us, badger us. Show up at the legislature. Rachel wants to hear from you.
Thanks.
I was gonna say something about Brad, but I won't. Leave that to you guys. At first it was very weird, but I'm only 5 months in and now it's totally normal. So, no, lobbying comes in all different forms and I actually prefer it when it's really straightforward. Hi, I'm here to lobby you on this issue. Here's why, here's who I represent, here's the perspective I have. And I actually think that when you come to council and when you come to meetings to, speak to a specific issue, being really clear about what your perspective is, what your rationale is for why you should be speaking to this, what your rationale is for why a decision should be made in the way that you'd like to see it made. I think those are really helpful. And acknowledging the role and the challenges that the decision makers in front of you face in making decisions of all varieties is really helpful. You can say, I know this is a tough decision. I understand you're balancing this priority and that priority. And, it's tricky to find a balance. Here's where our group, or somebody in my perspective, somebody with my experience, sees this issue. And here's how I understand this to be a balance. So I think it's really great to just put it all out there. We get quite quickly used to being lobbied, and it's better to just, I actually find it quite comfortable to just have somebody say, here's what I'm here to talk to you about, and here's what I'm here to lobby you on, rather than, the alternate, which can end up feeling kind of deceptive at a later date. So go for it.
Thank you. And that, you kind of both hinted a bit about comfortable and uncomfortable, not as much personal as you might have done. But that's part of the difficulty of being a politician is how much to expose yourself, kind of thing that as well. And where your comfort levels are as a person, as an individual. Not easy, and I think very challenging for most of us, particularly over a period of time. So, you've heard a lot. We got time for a few questions. The kind of thing that, so if you're interested in questions, put up your hand. We'll start right here, and we'll move, and lunch is coming soon.
Thank you. My name's Noel Somerville. This conference is about bold advocacy for big change. And kind of the thing that interests me is how much unanimity do we have about the big changes we'd like to see? I don't have much problem with this. What I want to see is a government who is prepared to follow through on a commitment to get us off the revenue roller coaster and really address revenue reform head on. I would like our speakers to talk about what is the big change you would like to see.
Okay, thank you. Who wants to try that one first? Hillary, you're new, innocent, you can do it.
I've just come out of an election, so I should know this, right? That was supposed to be part of my campaign. That's a great question. So, of course, I work at the municipal level, and a lot of the issues that I feel really passionately about most comfortably sit in other levels of government. And so that's a bit of an interesting position for me to be in. I care a lot about poverty and housing and things of that nature. So there's a couple of shifts that I would like to see in Saskatoon that my colleagues wouldn't even know that I'm leading toward. And one of them is for us to simply become really solid and this isn't a very big shift, but I'm going to say it anyway, become very solid in what our role is in social services, in the services that help people to not slip through the cracks and end up in poverty on our streets and that sort of thing. So that includes housing. We do some housing grants. that includes a lot of partnership building and a lot of how do we help other agencies to work together more fluidly. The other thing that I would actually like to see us do is take a leadership role on wages. I would like us to become a living wage employer and to extend that to our procurement. I don't think that conversation has ever happened or ever taken place at Saskatoon City Council. There are a number of other councils that have adopted living wage ordinances and have moved forward on policies. And I am in the very, very early stages of learning what the next steps are in Saskatoon. But there is a community level campaign to see businesses sign on to be living wage employers. And that's, I think, the first step is to build up an understanding of what that means and why that's important. And I'd like to see our city take the next step. And I'll probably only be getting that started by the time my first term is wrapping up.
I think an easy one for me is the campaign that Public Interest Alberta is leading right now around supporting public schools and ensuring that public funds go to public schools. I think it's absurd that in a time when we can't afford school lunches for kids, when we have 30,000 children in poverty in the Edmonton area, according to the United Way, that we're continuing to subsidize private schools in this province, some of which are charging more than $10,000 a year tuition for the kids who can afford it. I fully respect people's choice to choose a private school if that's what they wish to do, but there's no way that they should be allowed to download or invoice the taxpayer for the cost of that. So I think that's an easy one. I think we can all get behind. I think it's something that Minister Egan and Premier Notley have supported for years in opposition, and I hope that we can help build the public consensus for them to do the right thing and reinvest those dollars into the public education system.
Both of you, I will say very quickly that when it came to revenue at the city, there was some talk, which I wish would happen, but which is controlled by the provincial government, is that it should be based on a property tax, should be added on to the income tax, or if there was a GST, a portion of that, and the whole system of property tax makes no sense. We have to, and members of council have talked about that. We don't control making that decision, it's at the province, and the former governments have never got anywhere. The current government, I can't say, I haven't been involved with some of those discussions. So I think that in collecting the revenue, a couple of us, and I have to admit it was long, in at least my third term, where I did put in my literature that I supported raising property taxes because we needed more money, and got reelected. Kind of thing that, but I didn't say that in the first and second, and I don't think I would have said it in the first and second. And we did do some small, and of course, obviously that takes a majority of votes to do that. I also lived through the time when Klein cut a number of areas that impact cities. Members of council talked about increasing some taxes in order to cover that, and he threatened that if we did that, they would cut more money from us. That was very clear. If you cover those areas, we will cut you further. So that's what we were also living with. Okay, question over here? Yes.
So this question is sort of along the last speaker's sort of line of thought, and then also what Ian brought up this morning. But of course, one of the big issues that we face in the province is around revenues and how we get more revenues. So we know we live in a time of record low oil prices. We know that these prices are not going to rebound anytime soon, and that these are also resources that the world is committed to move away from. And we also know that the provincial government knows all that. And so I'm just wondering if you have any insights on how do we actually move the dial on what has been sort of the third rail of provincial politics and actually introduce revenue back into the equation.
We watched that happen to Saskatchewan. Maybe you want to talk about it. That was
Revenues are not a very pretty topic at our council these days. We don't have many of them. Yeah, I mean, honestly, municipalities, our hands are tied in terms of where we're able to get our revenues. The province, we are a creature of the province controls where our revenues come from, and how we're able to collect them. And that's just what it is. So we can either charge user fees or we can raise property taxes. Saskatoon has a really unique revenue source, which is our land branch. We are actually we sell land. to developers. And that causes, there's some trickiness there. We have to be very careful and cautious about that. But a lot of the revenues that business for us brings in are used to support our housing programs and things of that nature. So we are certainly actively talking about what that is going to look like. And I think some of what I think we will be talking about going forward is talking about our user fees and how they actually support a sustainable future. So for instance, right now, Saskatoon has our recycling bins are on our utility. So you pay yearly for your blue bin, your recycling bin, but you do not pay for your garbage. So we're actually talking about potentially reversing that, which would double the income that we earn from that, probably taking the blue bin off the utility, putting the black bin, the garbage bin on. And that seems like a really small thing, but it's it reflects a totally different set of priorities to be charging people to pick up their recycling than it does to pick up their garbage. So some of these things are really small, but I think we can use the values and the priorities that we have and want to demonstrate in how we actually charge citizens for the services that we're providing.
Thanks.
I'm very curious to see how the rest of this carbon pricing conversation plays out, because we're just seeing the beginnings of effectively a new tax in Alberta that is allowing us to do some really creative reinvestments to ensure that it's not regressive and punitive, that I think is going to demonstrate both a good function in terms of a sin tax and punishing a behavior that we want to discourage, while at the same time rewarding and incentivizing good decision making, etc. As I mentioned earlier, I'm open to consumption taxes around things like sugar added beverages and other pieces. I think that's dancing around the margins though, but I don't think we can just sit here and say, well, Albertans are ready for a provincial sales tax. I think it needs to be part of a broader conversation about, let's look at education property taxes, let's look at property taxes because they're pretty regressive, they don't help. Let's look at minimum income, let's look at changes to living wage and all these other pieces that we talked about, because I think I do believe that, as Michael and Hillary have said, Albertans are ready for paying for something they believe has good value and a return for their family and their community. I think it needs to be much broader than just one sort of throw it at the wall solution. I think it's got to be a much broader conversation that unfortunately I don't think the government has bandwidth or capital to do right now. I hope that in the next election and in the next term we can have a more robust conversation, and I think carbon tax is going to be an excellent case study in how to get there.
And I will just say that I can't tell you how often as a member of council we hated the fact that property tax was going for schools rather than to us, and that got added on to our bill, and we had no say over what that was, and how Edmonton actually got jerked in a very negative way about part of the way that was done. But you know, we saw that that was the city's way of getting money. The province should stay out of taking some of the property tax. You could take, education should have been all out of the tax they raised another way. Didn't happen, of course, and so we suffered through that. So any further? Yes, any further? We got time for one more. One more. Okay. Way in the back.
Yes, I have a revenue solution that was applied to a local government that I'm involved with, but I'm not elected official or anything, so this is a ethics question for elected officials and a problem that as an advocate I've run into. So a local municipality has a very wealthy landowner who forms a partnership with a billion-dollar company, and they want to develop some land. So they approach council with a $750,000 offer to do a development plan. So this is a small piece of land within a community. Council decides to go with this offer to take the $750,000 because they're short of revenue, and hire a planner to develop a plan for this piece of land without consulting the community. So it's processed through, at this point goes to council in 2 weeks from now for final reading. There's been open houses and people have complained, but so far I haven't ran into an elected official who thinks that he has or she has an ethical problem in dealing with this. So if you were me as an advocate, how would you try to put some focus on this issue?
Thanks, Sam. I think I'll ask Hillary first.
I'm still wrapping my head around all of the pieces of this. So the private interest groups wanted to see a certain type of development on this land. They offered the city a bunch of money in order to do the planning work. And now, the city did not consult the community before taking the money. I'm just trying to figure out what council would actually decide to do that. Yeah, no, this is a pretty foreign arrangement to me. And my guess is that there's probably, I would talk to a lawyer actually, there's probably some kind of legal argument to challenge council on its own internal policies with respect to, when and where they consult the community and how, how they're able to bring in revenue, private revenue for, I'm still not sure if I fully understand whether this is public land or some of the other parts of this, so there's a few details maybe we should talk over lunch. But my guess is that there is something within the municipality's own policies or structure that could be used to challenge the process that was undertaken, and that's probably the strongest argument to be moving forward from. I'm seeing a lot of head nodding, which probably means you've exhausted all of those efforts, but no? Okay, well, maybe we could chat more because I'm not sure, I'm a little hazy on a few of the details yet, so let's talk.
The gentleman reminds me of one other point that I wanted to make in this whole talk, is that all too often we focus our lobbying efforts on the elected officials. We go straight to the MLA or the city councilor or the trustee, but I think it's just as important to build strong relationships with the bureaucrats and the band of administrators. If you can get into the planners, the city managers, those other folks, if you can get attention with principals, senior superintendents, other folks like that, if you can get those meetings and build those relationships, often it's those bureaucrats who are writing the recommendation reports, who are briefing the MLAs, who are the continuity between different governments. It's essential so then when some issue comes up, that when, I can think of some at the board table where our colleagues get an issue in front of us, we look at it, we look to the superintendent and say, what do you think? And if the superintendent says, you know what, this is good for our district, you're gonna have a pass vote. If the superintendent and the bureaucrats have apprehension and they're not sure about it, they have cold feet, it can kill your vote. So I think as advocates, it's essential that you lobby not just the decision maker, but those who are advising the decision maker.
Thanks. I'll just build slightly on that as well, because I do think that's really important. And then when you do deal with at the political level, if you have dealt with administration and you know that they aren't very favorable, and thinking that you realize that the final decision is made by the elected officials. And I have watched people say, the bureaucracy is awful, they won't deal with us, blah, blah, blah. And I can tell you that you almost guarantee you lose your vote. The council members are very concerned about people who are very negative about the administration. At that point, I make the decision, not them. And you need to be talking to me and giving your arguments. And you certainly can say that you worked with administration, but you want this result, and that's fine. As soon as you start saying they're no good, they wouldn't listen to me, they were awful, I'm probably not going to vote for you for what you want very further, because it's me that has to make the decision. I may know the property you're talking about as well, and I am working with the group maybe that's involved with some of that, but I don't know. And that, because if it's in the area, I probably know which piece of land he's talking about, but I'm not sure. No, it's the story.
a situation with a public-private partnership.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I would just add to what Michael's saying is, ask for leadership from the leaders. That's their job. And if you haven't seen leadership from the administrative level, sometimes it's because they think the leaders aren't going to like it.
Yes.
So sometimes things are getting throttled at the administrative level because they think we're not going to like it, because the last council would have. Ask for leadership from the leaders.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's the point. So I think we're done. We're done. And the lunch is out there. Thank you all very much.